Hey guys, so I thought this would be an interesting topic, and it's something I've never really covered or even really touched on, honestly. I will note before we continue, these are my personal standards. There are plenty of atheists who have lower or higher or just different standards. Some atheists who really want to believe in God but just can't, and others who say basically nothing could convince them. I personally fall into more of a category of apathy with regards to desire to believe in God. I don't feel like any kind of loss by not believing. I don't have an active desire to do so. But I also definitely am not a fan of the mindset of like, oh, nothing could convince me, or I just don't want to believe. Honestly, that seems just as problematic as a lot of talking points I hear from theists. So let's just get into it. I want to first establish the difference between two things here: worshiping God and believing in God. This video is about what it would take for me to believe God exists, whether that be a specific God, a multitude of polytheistic gods, or a deistic kind of hands-off God. Just about said God or God's existence, not a love or reverence for them. Even with undeniable evidence of God's existence, I would never worship any God I believed in. I do not think that the world we live in is compatible with a God I personally would find worthy of worship. I'm happy to make a second part discussing that, but I'll leave it there. If these criteria were met in a way that, say, I knew the Christian God to be real, I would believe in him but not convert to Christianity, as I don't think that God is worthy of worship. I have two main things which would convince me. These things would not need to occur in tandem, just one or the other would be enough, but obviously in combination with each other would be more concrete. One of these things is an undeniable personal experience of God. I want to note, however, that this does not mean a personal experience as in I personally, alone, only me, speak to God, feel God's presence, see God, etc. When I say this, I mean some kind of large event with substantial amounts of the population as witnesses, and records of the event happening, and no otherwise logical explanation. There's a few reasons for this. If the experience is unique to me, even if other people have had similar experiences at different times, there is simply a multitude of more rational explanations. I've used psychedelics in the past and continue to do so, so there's a possibility that those types of substances can result in lasting psychosis, along with my own personal history of mental health. Whether this personal experience would be experienced stone cold sober or with psychedelics, there are existing explanations for why people have religious experiences, both within naturally occurring psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, as well as just sober. There is just much more evidence that it would be as a result of brain chemistry and psychology than as a result of it actually being God. I would also apply this to near-death experiences. NDEs with God are often culturally dependent as a result of the way NDEs work. In very simple terms, essentially being neurons firing rapidly. Certain connections in the brain are stronger than others, which means that a devout Christian is more likely to have a quote-unquote exercised connection that makes them more likely to recall God or religious teachings than, say, an atheist, and as such may have a different NDE experience. Same with other religions. I've personally been on life support. I probably would have died if I had not been taken to the hospital even 10 minutes later, and had no such experience. Basically, NDEs would not be something that would convince me here, as there is a rational explanation for why these things happen beyond God's existence. Okay, so if a one-on-one personal experience with God would not convince me, why did I include personal experience? When I say personal experience, I mean a public and documented event with no other rational or better supported explanation. Think Warrior Cat's Omen of the Stars. StarClan literally appears in the physical to the entire population, everyone remembers it, can attest that it happened, and there is no other rational explanation. On an actual real religion, say Revelations came true, Second Coming of Christ. Everyone witnesses it, there's no other rational explanation. God appears in Times Square, does a miracle or some shit, and millions of people see it. That kind of thing. Ultimately, I do think that this is the more flimsy of the two things, but if an event like this happened and then there was further studying to find no other explanation, be it a hoax or natural phenomena, I would genuinely believe in God if there was an eyewitness account with a very high amount of witnesses and no other rational explanation. The second thing is objective proof through scientific study. This would not have to be something I see personally, the same way I've never seen, say, a black hole or a neutron star, but I'm aware that they exist and believe as such because I have a very base level understanding of why they exist, how we found them, and that they are unanimously considered to be real within the field relevant to them. This would not mean a one-off paper from some niche publication or Christian university, or a paper that essentially is used by some to imply a God of the Gaps type idea where we don't fully understand it, so God is used as an explanation, but rather a widely studied phenomenon that is agreed upon by the greater scientific community to not only maybe hint at God's existence, but prove it is true to the best of our knowledge. I'm not really sure what research like this would look like, to be frank, but in my head it's something akin to the way we have searched for alien life. Planets with liquid water and the conditions for life as we understand it do not prove that there is life on those planets, but it's indicative that it's absolutely a possibility. However, because it's not actually proven, it's just possible, I do not currently have a strong belief that extraterrestrial life exists, even if I do consider the idea that it's possible, and there's some evidence to support that. Some of the ways we search for alien life includes looking for signals that seem to be communicating a universal constant, such as hydrogen signals, as it's the lightest and simplest element on the periodic table. So a consistent signal that's not better explained by natural phenomena communicating using a universal constant would be a possible indication of life. Or on a more sci-fi but still technically possible realm, evidence of things like a Dyson sphere or Dyson swarm, which would be detectable in the same way that we currently search for exoplanets, as well as possibly energy signals or amount of energy, as that energy would not be emanating in the way it normally would, as it would be utilized by a civilization. The point being, I think that there is a possibility that some areas of the way we currently search for extraterrestrial life could be applied to God, sort of a God leaving its signature on the universe type thing. Obviously, none of this research currently exists, so it's all ultimately hypothetical, but if it ever came to pass in a way that was agreed upon by the wider scientific community, that would convince me, even if I do not witness it personally or lack academic experience to understand it on a deeper level. Ultimately, my main reason for not believing in God is that I lack convincing evidence. Lots of religious folks like to spout the idea that it's a hatred for God, a desire to sin, or a willful choice to reject God. And to support that idea, many Christians will often argue that evidence I personally require has been presented, and I want to talk about that for a second. There are two main things here. The argument of God is all around us in relation to my ideas around research possibly being formatted, around God leaving a sort of footprint on its creation, as well as the largely witnessed events in regard to Jesus as like a whole. That argument stems from a lack of knowledge or understanding, whether that be of beauty or seeming perfection, something akin to the teleological argument, or a literal lack of scientific study to explain certain things. Whereas the evidence that would convince me would be out of gaining knowledge, some natural phenomenon that does not fit within our current understanding of the universe and physics, and also is entirely unable to be worked into it in any revised version. This would be in combination with similar things we search for when seeking extraterrestrial life, things that indicate both intelligence and intent. While some people may say the beauty of a sunset is proof of God, the beauty of a sunset is explained why we find it beautiful through human psychology, and why it happens through chemistry and astronomy. Your overwhelming awe at something does not negate the actual understanding and scientific reason for why it happens or why you feel that way about it. I talk a lot about this in my fine-tuning video, so I'll keep it short, but that argument falls flat in a lot of ways, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. But essentially, these things are not gaining knowledge that is only able to be described through intelligent design, but rather through a misunderstanding of how they work, or an inability to conceive things on a larger scale. Which is not to be condescending. All humans, just as humans, have a very difficult time conceptualizing things on a large scale. But nonetheless, these arguments do not meet the criteria of gaining new knowledge that is only indicative of intelligent design. They are simply just misunderstandings. When it comes to the Jesus thing, I think a lot of Christians would consider the entirety of the New Testament, basically, to meet the criteria of a large amount of witnesses seeing proof that God exists with their own eyes. But I have a few complaints here. One, none of this is documented in a sufficient way. There is very, very minimal evidence that Jesus even existed at all during the time he lived outside of the Bible, and essentially no record of miracles or other things indicating he's God beyond religious texts. There's also no attempt to study this and explain it through alternative means that then fell short and left us with no other rational explanation. The New Testament includes a plethora of historical inaccuracies, and the Bible as a whole presents a lot of events and ideas that do not align with our modern understandings of how the universe works. If this were the case and there was undeniable evidence that the events of the New Testament occurred, I would concede, but the only real source we have for these events is one that is outrageously biased, as it's the very religious text promoting the story. And even under my own standards of personally witnessing an event akin to this, I would not expect generations, thousands of years after the event, to believe it to be true in the same way that I do. While personally, I would require this to be a confirmed real event with no better explanation, not just through religious sources, but through secular ones. Even with that in mind, at the end of the day, I, again, would still not expect people 2,000 years from now to believe in the event the same way that I did. Basically, the documentation is either lacking or biased, and as such, I don't think it's worth considering as truthful. And if an event like this occurred within my lifetime, I would expect its truth to be supported not just through people who have a vested interest in believing it to be true, i.e. Christian or otherwise religious groups, but through secular sources to also put in the time and research and come to the conclusion that there's no better explanation than it being God. This is simply not the case for the Bible or the New Testament or any other holy book for that matter. Essentially, to sum it all up, I require undeniable evidence that is not unique to me and cannot be better explained through natural phenomena. And I expect that to be supported through neutral or secular organizations that have no particular interest in proving it to be true, but simply just finding the truth is their goal. And I'll end the video by reiterating what I said at the beginning. This would not cause me to convert to that religion or worship that God, but simply believe in the God's existence. If you want a video on why I wouldn't worship God even if I believed in him, I am happy to make that video, but this video is already longer than I wanted it to be. So, thanks for watching, guys. Ha de.
The children think too much, they've hardly a fear of God, always asking questions they should only wish away.